Economist John Lott writes that most developed countries ban absentee ballots unless the citizen is living abroad or require photo IDs to obtain these ballots. Even higher percentages of the European Union or other European countries ban absentee for in-country voters. In addition, some countries that allow voting by mail for citizens living in the country don't allow it for everyone. For example, Japan and Poland have limited mail-in voting to those who have special certificates verifying that they are disabled. France banned absentee voting back in 1975 because of massive fraud in Corsica, where postal ballots were stolen or bought and voters cast multiple votes. Mail-in ballots were used to cast the votes of dead people. France made an exception in 2020 to the ban on absentee ballots to those who were sick or at particular risk during the coronavirus pandemic. Poland and 2 cities in Russia have adopted mail-in ballots for elections in only 2020, but most countries haven't changed their regulations at all. Among the 38 Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, or OECD countries besides the US, a report found that, get this, 78% of the countries either do not allow mail-in ballots for people living in the country or require a photo ID to get a mail-in ballot. My guest helps lead Cause of America, a national, nonpartisan, citizen-led volunteer organization solely focused on election integrity. He's a retired Air Force colonel with over 25 years active duty in space and missile operations. Please welcome retired Air Force Colonel Sean Smith. Colonel Smith, thank you so much for coming in. How big is there a problem with voter integrity here in our country?
Bigger than the public can imagine. Everyone we talk to in the grassroots groups in the states always tell us the same thing. They tell us our state's the worst and they're all right.
You remember when I think it was Obama said that the last election was the safest one we ever had? I think a lot of people are completely, totally oblivious to how easy it is to fix an election, how widespread the fraud is.
Yeah, I think you're right, Larry. It was Chris Krebs also, who was at the time was the director of Cybersecurity Infrastructure Security Agency under DHS, who came out publicly for the first time, I think on Election Day in 2020, and said it was the most secure election in U.S. history. And then, of course, the industry representatives and the insiders all came out and parroted the same thing in a joint statement. But it's ludicrous. None of them have the technical skills to evaluate what you'd have to look at to draw that conclusion. And even now, citizens have been working on this for years, just trying to get to the data to find out what was true about the election. And it's been so difficult. That lack of transparency is one of the greatest problems we face.
Colonel, I think it was Obama who said, it's hard to fix an election in America because we have basically 50 different voting systems, and therefore nobody could really fix an election, not on a national level. Your response?
Well, we don't really have that many different voting systems. What we have is a few primary vendors. The 5 largest vendors, voting systems in the United States, provide the voting systems that almost 90% of the population votes on, including all of the largest counties in the United States, which are the counties which effectively determine the electoral direction for their given states. So the idea that, well, it's too diverse for someone to hack into all of it or to control over it, all of it has been, I think, soundly refuted. It's interesting because many of the same people who echoed that claim were then just a couple years later talking about how the Russians had infiltrated and compromised the election and it was rigged. I don't know how you reconcile those two positions, but cognitive dissonance is common on the left.
Well, that's right. People like Donald Trump called an election denier. Hillary, for 4 years of Trump's presidency, referred to him as illegitimate, said the election was stolen, to the point, Colonel, where according to a YouGov poll in 2018, 66% of Democrats believe the Russians changed vote tallies. Even though Homeland Security Secretary Jay Johnson testified not a single vote tally was changed by the Russians, although they tried. And he said, we don't know whether or not the Russian interference altered the outcome of the election. We'd have to be mind readers. Yet, according to a Gallup poll 2018, 78% of Democrats believe the Russians altered the outcome of the election. And so a greater percentage of Democrats believe 2016 was stolen than Republicans who feel the same way about 2020.
Yeah, I think that's right. In some sense, they were both right about the prospect or vulnerabilities in our election systems. It's just that for some reason, people think it only happens when they don't get their way. What's actually probably true is that our systems, and not just the voting systems themselves, but all of the systems that we rely upon for our elections, including the voter registration systems and including now widespread use of mail-in ballots, the almost complete lack of any discipline in requiring government-issued photo ID to determine eligibility and to make sure that we're actually getting a ballot from an eligible voter and only one from them. All of those have broken down in our country. We're really at immense risk for corruption in our elections.
Got a question for you. Are you concerned with stock market volatility?
Markets closing in on their worst year since the financial crisis.
Since 2020, the Dow closed down more than 1,100 points.
Financial markets had their worst day since the start of the pandemic.
Do you really trust this economy?
The U.S. economy could be headed for a recession.
Tonight, the alarming spike in inflation soaring to its highest level in nearly 40 years.
What if you can invest in a portfolio with a high fixed rate of return that's not correlated to the stock market? Well, you can turn your monthly income on or off, compound it, whatever you choose, and get this, there is no loss of principal if you need your money back, and absolutely no fees. Just log on to investyrefy.com. Folks, I personally invest with my own money with YRefi. So log on to investyrefy.com or call 888-YREFI24. That's 888-YREFI24. So, Colonel, back up. Give me your take on 2020. When you hear people like Donald Trump say the election was stolen, your reaction is what?
Well, I honestly don't listen too much to public figures. I make exceptions. You know, there are people, and I don't want to flatter you. I normally try not to do that, but you know, there are people who make sense, who speak from reason, who provide evidence. People having opinions. I've been around a lot of people with opinions. They're usually not worth a lot. But and in 2020 for that election, I wasn't. Prior to that election day, I did nothing with election integrity. I couldn't have told you a single voting system vendor. I knew nothing about our elections other than sort of the policy behind them. But and I didn't start looking because of the outcome. I started looking because I saw an article about voter turnout, and it seemed odd. And once I applied the research skills that I had been trained in and practiced in the military, and started looking at voter registration statistics, I became convinced that there was something completely amiss. And the more we've dug, the more we found. So all the assurances about our secure election systems, now that I've seen the test reports and the test plans, and now that we've seen reports on the insides of the systems, for example, out of Mesa, or Halderman's report out of Georgia on the Dominion ICX systems there's no doubt in my mind that our systems are either corruptible or corrupt. And the only way to verify or make them clean is to really start over.
Well, that was my next question. What, in your opinion, Colonel, should we do?
Well, we have a sort of a recommendation at a policy level. We call it Built for Integrity, but the idea is that you replace each of the corruptible and corrupted systems we now are suffering under as a nation with systems that are completely transparent to the public and that are really impervious and resilient against corruption. First thing is to return control of the voter registration to local officials, to county officials you can go in and talk to who know their neighbors. So counties, parishes, townships, boroughs, they should have the only control of their voting systems. They shouldn't be corruptible or alterable at any central location. That's step one. And then, as you alluded to, you have to eliminate the no excuse mail-in voting. There's no reason for it. It provides so many opportunities for fraud and corruption and error. And then it introduces a whole host of other expenses and risks that the public shouldn't have to deal with. And really, there's no way to ensure chain of custody for all those ballots being mailed in. So what do you do instead? You vote in person with a government-issued photo ID at your precinct on election day, and then you and your neighbors count the votes at your precinct, and that's where the counting is done by human beings using, third grade math. Once that's done, we have an election result we can trust. If you do it under video, if you do the counting under video, everyone can verify it for themselves. There's no need for experts or contractors. There's no, demand to trust election officials or technical experts. I have a fair amount of technical expertise. I would not ask any American to trust my word for it about an election total, and no public official should be doing it either. We can do this. We just have to have the will as a people.
And that's the final question. Do we have the will as a people? The only people I hear talking about voter integrity, voting on the same day, paper ballots, photo ID, frankly, are Republicans. Democrats, I believe, have figured out endless voting, early voting, mail-in voting benefits them. I don't see them coming around to the point of view that you have.
Well, I think it remains to be seen, whether the American people will reassert their authority over their own government. For sure, we have lost at this point. And I say this, people think maybe I'm being disingenuous, but I'm not. It's a mea culpa. I'm as responsible as anyone, and perhaps more, for sort of the failure to supervise my own government. The founders, as you know, anticipated that we would have a very active citizenry, and we have become less and less active, partly motivated by the sort of increasing centralization and technocracy that we've been pushed to. But it doesn't have to be that way. It's up to us. We can do this starting with our local officials, moving on to our states. And the more we act together, with unity of purpose, the more everyone understands what the real risks are and how easy it will be for us to fix it if we have the will. I think the better the chance that we get it back on track.
Colonel Sean Smith, thank you very much for coming on. I appreciate it.
Thank you, sir.
Now, you love the show, so hit that like button and hit that subscribe button. And then make sure you are on our mailing list, because every now and then, for reasons that escape me, YouTube seems to have issues with some of our videos. So to make sure you never miss a video, get on our mailing list. And you see that little round donate button? Hit that, throw a little something in the tip jar so we can keep hard-hitting programming, honest programming coming at you. Larry with Epoch.com, Larry with EPOCH.com, Larry with Epoch.com. I'm Larry Elder. This has been the Larry Elder Show. Remember, we've got a country to save. See you next time.